And now we come to World War II. Adolf Hitler's plan to seize all of Europe was set into motion on March 7, 1936, when he sent troops into the demilitarized Rhineland in violation of earlier treaties. The British did not seriously consider taking action, and the French feared to do so. Ironically, Hitler, known as the Fuhrer in Germany, had given orders to retreat if challenged by the French. Thus, his occupation of the Rhineland was accomplished by default. Both the British and the French remembered World War I. They remembered the slaughter and the loss of the men, and they were doing everything that they could to really keep things on an even keel, keep Hitler happy, in the hopes that they could avoid the outbreak of another major war along the lines of World War I. Then followed moves into Austria, March of 1938, where Hitler was greeted with enthusiasm, and into Czechoslovakia. He wanted the German-inhabited Sudetenland part of Czechoslovakia. A conference was held in Munich, Germany in September 1938, and there Britain, led by the Prime Minister at that time, Neville Chamberlain, and France betrayed Czechoslovakia by agreeing that Germany should take the Sudetenland in the hope that Hitler would be satisfied. This is when you began to hear the term appeasement. In other words, they were saying, here, take this area, and they hoped that if they appeased him, made him happy with that he would honor his agreement to not take any other territory. What they didn't realize was you simply could not reason with Hitler, and you could not trust him at his word. Nothing mattered to him other than his own goals for Germany, and just because he signed a treaty did not mean that he would honor it at all unless it was something that he wanted to do and he felt it was beneficial for him and for Germany. By March of 1939, he had taken all of Czechoslovakia. The next shock to the democracies came when the Soviet Union and Germany signed a non-aggression treaty on August 23, 1939. This meant that Hitler now could make war on Poland and the Western democracies without fearing a stab in the back from Russia. Hitler demanded from Poland a return of areas taken from Germany after World War I. When Poland refused, Hitler sent mechanized divisions crashing into Poland at dawn on September 1, 1939. Britain and France declared war, and World War II had officially begun. They were unable to really help Poland, and the country collapsed after 3 weeks. Germany and Russia then divided Poland up. In May 1940, Hitler sent troops across the borders of Belgium, Holland, and Luxembourg. Caught by surprise, the British and French were soon overwhelmed. The survivors of a British expeditionary force escaped across the English Channel, and the French capitulated to Germany on June 22nd. Hitler then made a fatal mistake when he decided to invade Russia on June 22, 1941. Great advances were made until early October, and then snow set in, and the cold intensified, and the Germans wanted to retreat, but Hitler said no. On December 4th, the Soviets launched a massive counteroffensive. The invasion would be a failure, and the Soviets would come over to the Allied side. And at this time, the Soviet Union, Russia, is led by Joseph Stalin. Germany, of course, is led by Adolf Hitler. Germany is in an alliance with Italy, who is led by Benito Mussolini. They are also allied, or will be allied, with Japan, and that is led by Emperor Hirohito. You have Winston Churchill is going to become the new Prime Minister of England, and of course Franklin Roosevelt is President of the United States, and a man named Charles de Gaulle will lead the Free French forces that kind of hang on and act as kind of an army of their own after France capitulates. In the U.S., isolationism was at its peak. As early as 1935, Roosevelt signed the first in a series of neutrality acts. FDR knew how the country felt, so he had to be cautious, but after winning his third term in 1940, he felt he could move to help Britain out more. Since direct American loans would bring up memories of earlier war debt defaults, the president came up with the Lend-Lease Bill, which became law on March 11, 1941. It authorized the president to sell, transfer, exchange, lend, lease, or otherwise dispose of arms and other equipment and supplies to any country whose defense the president deemed vital to the defense of the United States. Britain and China became the first beneficiaries. In order to deliver aid safely, the U.S. extended its patrol areas. As in World War I, American shipping began to be attacked by Germany. In retaliation, FDR froze all German and Italian assets in the U.S. and closed down their consulates. But instead of war coming from Germany, it came from another direction. Japan wanted to expand into areas in the Far East in order to acquire resources that it lacked, such as oil and rubber. As it was, they depended on the U.S. for most of their supplies, including 80% of their oil. During the summer of 1940, Japan forced the French government to permit the construction of Japanese airfields in northern Indochina and to cut off the railroad into South China. Japan had invaded China, and a war had been going on there since the 1930s. The U.S. responded with a loan to China and the Export Control Act of July 2, 1940, which authorized the president to restrict the export of arms and other strategic materials to Japan. Gradually, FDR extended embargoes on aviation, gas, scrap iron, and other supplies. On September 27, 1940, Japan signed a pact with Germany and Italy by which each pledged to declare war on any nation which attacked any of them. FDR froze all Japanese assets in the United States, restricted export of oil to Japan, and he took the armed forces of the Philippines into the Army of the United States and put their commander, General Douglas MacArthur, in charge of all U.S. forces in the Far East. By September 1941, the oil restrictions had tightened into an embargo. The commander of the Japanese Navy estimated that their oil reserves would last 2 years at most, 18 months in case of an expanded war. On December 7, 1941, a message was sent to the Japanese ambassador in Washington. He was to break off relations at 1 p.m., 7 a.m. Honolulu time, but delays in decoding held up delivery until more than an hour later than scheduled. At 7:53 a.m., the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. So this is a surprise attack. Of the 8 battleships in Pearl Harbor, 3 were sunk, 1 grounded, 1 capsized, and the others were badly battered. Altogether, 19 ships were sunk or disabled. About 188 planes were destroyed or damaged. The raid had killed more than 2,400 American servicemen and civilians and wounded 1,178 more. Later the same day, Japanese forces began assaults on the Philippines, Guam, and Midway, and on the British forces in Hong Kong. On December 8th, the U.S. declared war on Japan. On December 11th, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. The only thing that kept the attack on Pearl Harbor from being a total defeat for the United States was the fact that the aircraft carriers were not in the harbor at that time, and the Japanese did not destroy the facilities that were there to repair ships that were damaged. Had they done that and also got the aircraft carriers, we would have been severely crippled for quite some time, because you just can't turn out an aircraft carrier overnight. So this was really the only thing that kept us from being a total defeat for the United States. For months after Pearl Harbor, the news was all bad. On the first day of the war, American planes of the Philippines were caught lined up at Clark Field near Manila despite 10 hours' notice of the attack on Pearl Harbor. And that rests on Douglas MacArthur's shoulders, but he's not going to be blamed for this. Even though Franklin Roosevelt wanted to, morale at that point was so low he didn't feel like he could. By the end of December, Guam, Wake Island, the Gilbert Islands, and Hong Kong had all fallen. In the Philippines, where General MacArthur abandoned Manila on December 27th, the main American forces, outmanned and outgunned, held out on the Bataan Peninsula until April 9th, and then on the Rock, the fortified island of Corregidor. MacArthur slipped away in March when he was ordered out to Australia to take command of Allied forces in the Southwest Pacific. American forces finally surrendered Corregidor on May 6. The Japanese were not satisfied with their empire and kept expanding, but their failure to destroy those shore facilities at Pearl Harbor and the aircraft carriers came back to haunt them. The turning point in the Japanese advance was the Battle of Midway. Now, those soldiers, the American soldiers that surrendered at Corregidor, they had been on half rations for quite some time, and they were ill when they had to surrender. The Japanese philosophy was that you never ever surrendered. It was a total shameful thing to do to your family. And if a soldier surrendered, then they could be treated as beneath being human. And so the Japanese had no compassion for these men who surrendered. And they are going to be marched on what's going to become known as the Bataan Death March to POW camps. You're going to have 10,000 that are going to be killed on the way to these camps. If they couldn't keep up, they were beheaded, they were shot. Terrible mistreatment of these men. In the United States, because of the attack on Pearl Harbor, subsequently in February of 1942, Executive Order 9066 is signed into law by Roosevelt, and this calls for the internment of Japanese Americans. They're going to be placed at inland camps. Nearly 130,000 people were affected, and they had very short notice to basically pack up whatever they could carry and leave. And they were put into detention centers, concentration camps, not in the sense of what the Germans are going to do when they're going to gas people. That's not going to happen here. But these people are forced into camps. They will not be able to leave. They're going to be under armed guards while they're in these camps. In 1988, Congress officially apologized and revealed that military investigators at the time had reported no cases of subversion and authorized a cash payment for anyone who had been confined in the camps. So now we come to the Japanese have been advancing all across the Pacific. Roosevelt was saying that until we got to a point where we could actually kind of stop that advance, we couldn't really concentrate on helping too much in Europe. And so that's going to happen in June of 1942 when we have the Battle of Midway. Admiral Yamamoto, the Japanese naval commander, headed for Midway with nearly every ship under his personal command, but the Americans had broken the Japanese code, and Admiral Nimitz, commander of the Central Pacific, had reinforced Midway with planes and the carriers Hornet, Enterprise, and Yorktown. The first Japanese attack against Midway on June 4th severely damaged the island, but at the cost of about a third of the Japanese planes. Before another Japanese attack could be mounted, American planes caught 3 of the Japanese carriers in the process of servicing their planes. Those 3 were disabled and left to sink. The 4 sent up planes that disabled the Yorktown, and it was later sunk. But by that time, the 4th Japanese carrier had also been destroyed, and Yamamoto had to retreat. And when we come back, we will talk about the efforts against Germany now that Japan has kind of been stopped in its assault. They haven't retaken all the territory, but they've kind of stopped their expansion.